Alright everybody, so we're going to go through the goals, the means, and the results of the French Revolution with this PowerPoint. On the first slide, which you guys see there in front of you, two pictures, both relating to Robespierre and how it all ends for him. And you see in the picture on the left, that's kind of that chaotic scene near the end where one of his allies jumps out the window trying to escape, breaks his legs, and another one ends up shooting himself and killing himself successfully. But then in the picture, you actually see a guy firing a gun, and that guy's firing the gun at Robespierre. And there's some disagreement over like exactly what happens in that moment. Some people think that Robespierre ends up actually shooting himself because, like classic Robespierre, he wants to be remembered as the hero. But then there's this other guy, this soldier, this police officer, who ends up shooting him, and he takes the credit for it apparently because he wants the fame, wants the glory to go down in history as being the guy who kind of shot the incorruptible Robespierre and helped bring him to his demise. But regardless of the case, he doesn't die from the bullet wound, as you guys know. He sits there all night with a shattered jaw, can't talk, and then the next day, you see the bottom left picture. It's really all that matters in the end. Robespierre ends up losing his head. So, what we're going to look at today is the goals, meaning what does the French Revolution set out to accomplish, the means, what does the French Revolution do in order to accomplish its goals, and then the results, which we can't really ever say completely. What are the results of the French Revolution? There's a famous response to that question where I forget who exactly says it, but the response to it is, I'm not too sure. It's too soon to tell what the results of the revolution are, meaning we're kind of still living with its legacy today. So let's dig into what we need to do with this. So, in class on Tuesday and then on Wednesday again, we're going to be looking at the Declaration of Rights of Man. We kind of started that process a little bit. What I would just pay attention to is, in general, as we go through that lesson, what are some of these freedoms that are being granted through the Declaration of the Rights of Man from the National Assembly? What are they doing for their people? Um, just a quick summary of them. Some basic liberties are defined for these people, that all men are to be equal before the law. No one is to have an exemption from paying taxes. Um, the whole aim of government is to preserve liberty for people, among all these other things, but there's a lot of questions that pop up with it. Um, who doesn't stand to benefit from this? Women, as we will see, enslaved Africans throughout the French Empire. There's a lot of groups of people that don't really get all these rights, and we'll look more at that on Wednesday as well. But its influence, you'll be able to see it in the English Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, as we've talked about in class, the Enlightenment, and yeah, Olympe de Gouges creating the Declaration for Women in response as well is something that is important to remember at this point in history. So after this is established, Louis XVI is going to hesitate and is not going to necessarily sign it as quickly as the National Assembly was hoping that he would. And if you guys recall from the video, there was the rumor going around Paris of the party where soldiers of King Louis grabbed the new French national flag, or what they call the tricolor, and they stamp on it, kind of mocking the revolution. And we talked with the fish ladies who storm into Versailles and they drag Louis and Marie Antoinette and their children out of Versailles and force them to live in Paris. And in the meanwhile, Louis is going to be forced to sign that he agrees to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Tries to escape, tries to make his way to Austria with his family, but is caught in the nearby border town between France and Austria called Varennes, and his family is basically brought back to Paris. And that really marks the end of Louis having any kind of authority, any kind of power in the French government at that time. It had already started slipping with the Declaration of the Rights of Man, but by the time he tries to make his way to Austria, he is seen as a traitor, and his power is basically done away with. Um, in the meanwhile, the National Assembly is de-Christianizing France, as you guys remember from the video, meaning trying to rid France of Christian influence, which is a lot easier said than done. You're talking about a religion that has hundreds of years of history in France, and it's just so instrumental to who the French people are. And it really is hard for them to just ignore and just forget about their religion. It's almost an impossible thing to do. It's just like, everything that defines you and who you are, yeah, you can stop doing that now and start being what the revolution wants you to be. And that's a huge ask of the people. And that needs to be understood. Um, to rewind for a second, when the National Assembly first creates the Declaration, it is important, before Louis flees, to remember they want to make Louis a constitutional monarch, meaning the king's sovereignty, or his right to rule, is shared with the Legislative Assembly. They also have the right to rule. And Louis doesn't want that to happen. He wants to preserve things as the way they are, which is why it's believed that he ran to Austria, so that the Austrians would help him basically reset the revolution, bring it to an end, so that he could reestablish himself as the absolute monarch that he believed he should be. Now, as Louis has escaped from France and tried to make his way to Austria, there becomes vocal frustration with what he's doing and with the way he feels about the revolution. And there becomes to emerge this new group of leadership. You had in the beginning moderate people who said France needs to change, but we need to keep things the way that they are. We don't need to really like totally reset society. We need to reevaluate who gets the power, who gets to do what they want to do. And meaning the king's power should be limited. But once he goes running for the Austrian border, he's going to lose a lot of support, and it's going to empower those who want to see a lot more happen with Louis. And so new leadership is going to emerge. The names that you guys see here, Danton, Marat, Robespierre would be included with this group. These guys would be part, if you remember, of the Jacobins. And they are the extremist group. And they're calling for a lot more blood. In case Louis' severed head doesn't give that away to you, I guess I had to tell you that. But they just start calling for executions of the aristocracy, executions of the monarch, and execution of Marie Antoinette. And in the meanwhile, France is going to be a republic. It's going to become a republic, meaning that popular sovereignty rules, meaning the people are the ones who have the authority in France. And with that authority, the people can decide what they want to do with their king. And so that he can't be a symbol of the counter-revolution or the effort to do away with the new republic, they're going to vote to execute him. Because unless you're living in a weird country, I don't think anyone really wants a dead guy to be their king. So Louis gets executed, and that really marks the end of the monarchy in France. So now we have a republic. But in all of this, you have instability. France is at war with Austria and Prussia. You have people who are really pushing back against the efforts of the government to do away with religion and that whole effort of de-Christianization. And you really have instability in the country. You have instability from foreign threats. And so to head off that instability, to try to protect the Republic from this instability, you have a group called the Committee of Public Safety that's going to emerge. And like it says up top, this group is meant to protect France from the opponents of the revolution. It is meant to protect the people who support the Republic. It is meant to protect the Republic. And Robespierre, the lawyer that we've talked about, the member of the Third Estate, the delegate at the Estates General, and later the National Assembly, he will be the leader of this 12-man Committee of Public Safety. And he is going to begin what is known as the Reign of Terror. I mentioned this in class, I'll say it again. This is basically Robespierre saying, do what I say and you'll be free, or else. And it is kind of this weird thing to wrap your head around, that he is basically thinking, I can preserve liberty, I can preserve equality, I can preserve fraternity, this idea of brotherhood, if I scare people and make them do as I say. So it is kind of a weird thing. And in this whole reign of terror, 40,000 quote-unquote enemies of the Republic are going to be executed. It could be by commonly, like we saw, by guillotine. It could be by firing squad. They could be, in certain cases in parts of France, sunk in ships in the middle of the river. Marie Antoinette will be executed during this time. Olympe de Gouges, the one who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women, she will be executed. And the scary thing is, what is an enemy of the Republic? Who gets to decide that? And as I say that, I'm sure most of you are like, well, it's Robespierre. Correct. It's one person that gets to really decide the fate of all of these people throughout France. And eventually it's going to be Robespierre who is going to run out of luck when he comes storming in and says he has more names of enemies of the Republic to be guillotined, and they're in this very room, this room where the Committee of Public Safety and what's called the National Constituent Assembly are meeting. People are going to say, we could be on that list. And if we're on that list, we need to do something about this. And they're eventually going to turn on Robespierre and have him arrested and have him executed so that this reign of terror can come to an end. This cartoon kind of gives you some insight as to how these radicals behave. This doesn't necessarily just apply to the reign of terror. It also could apply to the sans culottes. It could apply to a lot of different people at this time, but just the radicals of the revolution. And we'll revisit this in a little bit as we get back into class and talk about this stuff. So, where we leave off with ourselves, the revolution isn't concluded, at least in my opinion. Some people do say it does end with Robespierre's death. I don't agree with that. So what we'll say is, for now, France is struggling with forming a government that's satisfactory to all people of France. The reforms of the revolution aren't delivering as they were intended to. It will take the actions of one man to change the direction that France is heading into. So our next phase that we'll look into is going to be the reign of Napoleon. So that's it for now. If you guys have questions, let's talk in class. I definitely want to hear them. If you're feeling like the revolution has got you confused, it stands for liberty and equality and fraternity, and yet it's all this violence and ceaseless beheadings and just crazy instability. If that confuses you, then I would say that, strangely enough, the revolution makes sense to you right now, because it is this weird relationship of a group of people who stand for liberty and for freedoms, entitled to what they see as being all people, but willing to engage in some really terrible, awful acts of violence to, in their mind, ensure that liberty and freedom and equality will come out in the long run. The question of, is all the violence worth it to preserve these freedoms in the end? That is definitely something that we're going to talk about. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you in class.